Hey, it's been a while. Been 2 years, in fact. Probably here for another Borderlands video, huh? Well, here I am. Back to make, something that isn't Borderlands. But it's a first-person shooter, so there's that. Alright, look. It's been a couple of years, and I feel like you guys watching deserve a proper explanation. While I was excited for Borderlands 3 and the script that I wrote for it, when I went further into the editing process, I kinda just got stuck in the notion of, is this really worth it? I mean, sure, Borderlands 3 was fun, but I've owned it since release, and I've not even bothered to touch any of the DLCs. I don't even know what they are at this point, to be honest. While the combat was well crafted and the loot was pretty rewarding, I just didn't see much point in finishing my critique when the game itself wasn't really all that memorable. Its characters were tolerable, and its narrative was more or less just kind of a slog to get through. And I went through it twice. So, I'm sorry to those who watched me way back then and were hoping for me to finish my critique of that, but I'll be honest, I don't really see myself finishing that project in the future. But I hope that you'll understand and I can continue to entertain you further later on. Are you still here? You still watching? Great. Let's talk Halo.
Halo, its divine wind will rush through the stars, propelling all who are worthy along the path to salvation.
Halo is a Goliath, a beast, a revolutionary series with some of the tightest shooting, marveling set pieces, and competent AI I've ever experienced in my 20 plus years of gaming. From questionable sand to unnatural caves, Halo has taken us across its spanning universe to kill aliens, save humanity, and uncover the secrets of the Forerunners. With the MCC on Xbox alone, I've clocked in over 109 days in gameplay, and a majority of that was just campaign. I don't know why I'm admitting this. Either way, while I am hyped for 343's next installment, I'm just not as excited for the narrative as I have been for the previous entries. While the reveal showed off today, that'll give you some idea of how long I've worked on this, it looked more akin to Far Cry than even its closest second cousin, ODST. So, in light of this, I decided to take a deeper dive into the series itself and break apart what I believed was the most compelling parts of the narrative to begin with. And upon my journey, I actually found an appreciation for a story I thought I knew biblically. With every playthrough, I uncovered something new, and I was actually surprised with the underlying tones I ended up picking up. So, with December's launch approaching rapidly, I thought I'd go back to the game that started it all. No, not that one. No, not that one either. No, it's Reach. We're talking about Halo Reach.
Gamma Station, this is Fermi at RSO. Unconfirmed report of an in-system split-space rupture.
Impossible. Check your source.
Split-space rupture detected.
Reach has been good to me. Time has come to return the favor.
There's no mistake. It's them.
Reach is too damn important.
The fleet that destroyed Reach was 50 times this size.
Prep for combat insertion.
What the hell was that? We're coming in hot. Hold on.
Mayday! Zigzag O2 will maintain altitude. Negative! We're going down!
Run! We'll hold this position as long as we can. Gamma Station Control, reading multiple pings below the orbital defense grid.
Slipspace rupture detected.
Yeah, we're picking up anomalies too.
You've been wondering what your Spartans died for? They died for this.
Reach was one of the first games I got to experience the hype around. While I remember playing 2 and 3 in my earlier years, I wasn't truly engrossed in the culture until around late 2009. Up until this point, Halo was more of a means of hanging out with friends on a weekend than anything to write home about. The multiplayer and custom games were legendary, but nobody I really knew was interested in Halo's narrative. People were more entertained by the sandbox of Halo's world than anything in the actual story beats themselves. Honestly, not really much has changed since then. While each game had their zealous defenders, it wasn't uncommon to meet an equal sum of people who found issue with that title. Halo CE had repetitive levels but revolutionized console shooters. Halo 2 was hard on Legendary but introduced matchmaking through Xbox Live. Halo 3 had those overlay cutscenes that made me want to throw my controller every time they came up, but had some of the best community features ever offered in a first-person shooter to date. Each game was unique in how people enjoyed it, and each game did their best to add on to the Halo formula to better the player's experience. And Reach might have been a controversial entry, but it was no exception to this rule, removing many weapons added in previous titles but introducing new mechanics while upgrading features seen in earlier games. Firefight made its return from ODST, Forge was revamped to allow more creativity, Invasion allowed wave-based combat, which was the first for the series, and custom games now add further ways to alter play. But the main focus I'd like to bring attention to was the story and how it was controversial to much of the fanbase. While many people saw the adventures of the Spartan team interesting, Reach faced criticism for lacking character developments among Noble Team and a straight-line story that retconned most of the expanded universe, some going as far as to declare it non-canonical. Though Reach is not as upfront about its story, I feel Bungie crafted a campaign that offered something never before seen throughout the previous games. While the Master Chief's story taught us what it's like to win, Reach reminds us what it's like to lose. Reach sets itself just before the beginning of the Master Chief story, acting as a stepping stone for the original trilogy. This would imply to many that he would be taking the place of John 117 and see how he got into the Pillar of Autumn, right? Actually, no. In fact, John doesn't even appear in the game at all. Aside from one little reference at the end of the game, those who read The Fall of Reach might have been met with some disappointment, but instead we're stepping into the boots of Noble, a guerrilla tactics Spartan team, with you stepping in as the plucky young rookie. As you're introduced to your ragtag team of super soldiers, Carter, Kat, Emil, George, and June, you're debriefed on your first assignment. A team of rebels is said to have knocked out the relay station in Visegrad, and it's up to you to get it back online. While you're dropped off, you're given your first real taste of freedom, the freedom to ignore. You see, Reach gave way to something known as the Thespian system, where the story was given through scripted moments that one could easily walk past, but would be crucial to understanding the bigger picture of the game's narrative. This would give the player expository dialogue if they wanted, but allowed the uninterested to carry on their merry way, thereby giving the player the freedom to choose how they experience the story. While I think this was a great decision for the player's freedom, I think not having the story in the forefront was a mistake, but I'll come back to that later. Further in your investigation, you're met with a group of civilians that Emil greets with hostility and force. Now this is something I'd like to bring some attention to. I always thought Emil in this moment was being a bit too aggressive out of nowhere, but there's some context the average person would never think about. Up until now, Spartans had mainly been deployed to deal with local insurrections and uprisings across the colonies. While the Covenant was a looming threat to humanity, they weren't given any real indication at this point to have encountered them on the planet. And even when they did encounter them beforehand, it was more an evacuation effort than an actual offensive. So it actually makes some kind of sense why Emil would be jumpy here. He was deployed to deal with terrorists, not aliens. And while one could definitely see his methods as brutalist, and similar to police tactics seen on Dateline, it does shine a better light into why he thinks the way he does. Back to the civilians though. George and the farmer speak Hungarian and warn something in the fields up ahead. You follow the trails to the house where you're faced with the one true nature of this game. While Spartans never die, those around you certainly can.
We've got military casualties, 2 of the missing troopers. Looks like they were interrogated. It's messy.
June, scouting from the sky, warns of movement. It is here where you're met with the least surprising reveal in the game. The Covenant is on Reach. While I'll admit I was never really shocked by this, considering that the Covenant was shown all throughout the marketing material, I still think that its biggest takeaway from this encounter was the fact that they tried. However, this isn't your story. The game revolves around dramatic irony, where the audience knows something that the character doesn't. Before we even get control of Noble 6, before we even see our custom Spartan in all of its glory, our fate is sealed as we see our own helmet burned into the molten ground below. So as much as I'm giving this scene shit right now, I don't think this encounter was too much of an issue.
In fact, I think this is a very interesting way of showing off the new enemy, the Skirmisher. As you push onwards, saving the lives of the stranded colleagues, you finally make your way to the relay outpost you originally came to scope out. It's here where you're given your first real taste of night vision. While I think it was a cool addition compared to Chief's common flashlight, aside from one instance I'll get to later, I never really found it all too useful. The tint was never really too helpful, especially when weighed against the visor from ODST. I'm happy it's included, but I just never found it all too engaging. After Kat rudely snatches a PS2 memory card from our hands, we're met with a girl who thinks she can go toe-to-toe with a 7'4" Goliath with a minigun. Fun fact though, if you translate what she's saying from Hungarian, you can actually find out she's trying to warn you of the impending threat, that they're still here, but unfortunately the only one who speaks Hungarian has her in his arms. Honestly, after learning this, I found this extra stupid, but that's besides the point. Let's continue. Unfortunately, this warning goes in vain, because pretty soon we're encountering a sword-wielding, Spartan-kicking, guitar-riffing zealot. As we just barely escape death by stabbing, Emil informs us of an escaping field marshal. We see our last surviving Marine dragged away as he grips for dear life. We decide against chasing after the escapee and opt instead to rescue the hostages and warn the planet of the impending threat.
2, handle her. 5 and 6, clear the hole.
1, 2, and 3 kills later, we're finally consoling our traumatized civvy. This is where Bungie tries their best to make George a sweetheart. Personally, I think this dialogue is a bit cheesy, but I think it worked in bringing out George's softer approach to the limelight. While the rest of Noble's team is characterized through subtle implications and a looted backstory, George is meant to represent the humanity we sympathize with.
Friend of yours?
Father,
Sha'ain alum. I'm sorry.
why would you be?
Holland gets contacted and we are issued winter contingency, and thus kickstarting the events of Reach, and cementing our fates in its inevitable destruction.
May God help us all.
Alright, so basically, this is an unscripted portion. I kind of just want to throw this in there because of the fact that a lot has happened in the time that I was editing this. Number one, Halo Infinite launched way earlier than it was supposed to, an entire month before it was supposed to. Number two, I finished reading The Fall of Reach, and there is a huge part that none of this I understood beforehand until I read this. So apparently, Winter Contingency, that basically made it where they had to cut all contact. No one could know that they knew that they were there. So that was the reason why in Fall of Reach, they just showed up out of nowhere and they were already attacking the planet. They were like, whoa, how'd they get past us so quick? It turns out they were able to strike it down, but they didn't freaking contact each other quick enough. So by the time that the freaking Pillar of Autumn and all that stuff was getting refitted, it was too late. So basically, while everyone there is just sitting around and fighting while Noble is happening, by the time you see the mission of the Long Night of Solace at the beginning, that is when the Fall of Reach is taking place. That is where the book starts, and that is just so weird to me, and that this is just all something that I have to talk about, because this is something that's happening in the middle of the night, and so much stuff is happening. Anyway, back to the video. We move on to Sword Base, the isolated Oni facility that houses some of the most vital intel and armaments across the planet. A Covenant Corvette has been recently crowding its airspace, and it's up to you to clear it. Due to its proximity to the base, unfortunately, orbital rounds cannot be used, so it's up to you to reactivate the comm tower, turn on the anti-air defenses, and clear out all remaining forces within the facility. As you push your way through the courtyard and clear the onslaught of Covenant flunkies, you're eventually given one of the most underrated tools in the entire game, the Target Locator. According to the developers, this was actually added somewhat later in Reach's development, which actually would explain why it's never really utilized past this mission. However, despite it only being used this one time, I can't really express how much joy I get from using it. All you've got to do is point, lock, and watch as 7 orbital rounds are fired at a small fire team of alien fodder. It's incredible. The only weapon that even compares to this would be Gears of War's Hammer of Dawn in the early games. Unfortunately though, it's only granted 2 shots throughout the mission. Luckily, Forge gives you the option to have 7, but this isn't that. So unless you prefer melee combat, you're going to have to be selective with your shots. Personally, I like to wait until the end of the mission to use it, using instead to take one of the Wraiths around instead of the Warthog. Fun fact though, this is also the only time in the entire game you see a transport Warthog. It's a very passing thing and it's easy to miss, but it's something that I found out while researching this. As I push up in my little Wraith clearing enemies around the bend, we're finally introduced to our new I guess we're not. After reactivating the comm tower and arming the AA guns, you recall back to wipe out the swarm of Banshees harassing the skies. It's also at this point that the Corvette goes from ground bombardment to focusing its fire on Sword Base. While I think this was a minor detail, I thought it was interesting to see the immediate effect your actions have in-game. This is the Thespian system continuing its great work, and I will continue to be annoying about that, don't at me. This time I actually decided to go with the Gauss Hog and push my way back towards the base. Now we can finally get introduced to our new vehicle, the Revenant. While the Revenant was mainly meant to be a contender to the Warthog for the UNSC, and mainly a replacement for the Spectre from Halo 2, I think it actually filled a very interesting niche where the driver is actually able to fire themselves instead of waiting on a passenger. I think this is really good to fight against the AI, unfortunately it's really easy to kill. After pushing back to base and clearing the area you fought so hard to clear, it's back inside to aid Noble in clearing the path. A couple dozen corpses later, and finally shooting down that Covenant Corvette, we're met with Halo's most astonishing reveal. And this time it's an actual surprise. The meeting of Catherine Halsey. To the uninitiated, allow me some exposition. Halsey was the lead scientist in the Orion 2 project that birthed the Spartan 2s, and more importantly, the Master Chief. Through horrific and inhumane alterations and grueling military training, she crafted the most ruthless killing machines known to humanity, and, up to this point, her only mentions were through expanded universe and passing thoughts. To meet the one who did all this was a marvel, and a big deal to those who indulge themselves in the EU like I have. Unfortunately, 343 would go on to later milk her likeness throughout the Reclaimer saga, but to see her here, honestly it's hard to put into words how important she is to Halo's story, and how crazy it is to finally meet her after all this time. Too bad she's a fucking bitch! While the novels tried to make her seem like someone who was doing what she thought was right, the games made her actions seem so much more rational to her overall character. She's sterile, she's callous, she's a hollow-hearted woman with daggers for eyes and a mind sharp enough to cut through anything. So to think this kind of person would endure toddlers to such cruelties as combat training and chemical castration? Yeah, honestly, I believe it. Halsey and Carter decide to have a pissing match since Kat wanted to overwrite her save game on Battlefront 2. George reminisces with his torture-adopted mother, and the sun sets on one of hopefully many successful campaigns against the Covenant.
His home would not fall. Uh-oh, John.
Onward to Nightfall. Kat assigns you and June to recon the surrounding vistas for potential outposts and investigate the Dark Zone in Reach's network. While it is common for every Halo to have their obligatory sniping mission, this is one of the first missions where you're actually able to cloak rather than just facing everyone head on. The sneaking in Halo isn't always the best option, but it's cool to be able to just sneak past everyone if you so desire. After wiping out a few Hellspawn, picking up the cloaking, and sneaking our way past a horde of enemies, we're left to push up to one of the most fascinating additions to the Reach family: wildlife. The Gouda are a race of tusked bipedal fauna wandering the mountainside and harassing the usurping pest that plagues their home. Now, allow me a tangent about these beautiful creatures.
The Gouda are very special in Reach's overall story, despite only appearing this one time. The Gouda were originally a huge piece of what made Reach stand out. While this was the first encounter of these towering behemoths, it wasn't meant to be the last. There were originally planned 3 encounters with these beasts. The first was here on Nightfall, but the second was supposedly you were going to be able to mount these wild creatures. By the final mission, you'd be faced against hordes of these monsters with Covenant riders fixed with plasma cannons as they charged at you with haste and aggression. However, due to time, bugs, and Peter, this beautiful creature never escaped this sealed mission. It was a similar reason why the Moa were no longer rideable, and why Kat wasn't allowed to laugh when you beat them to death.
This is real.
You know, for a while, every time you killed a Moa, Kat would laugh, because she had a little response to killing an alien. So sometimes you'd hear this, and we got a
Why'd you take
bug
that out?
that said that we were
But she was kind of cruel.
So we actually had to take that out.
Oh, bummer.
As soon as I heard it, they did a saved film of her laughing when you kill a Moa, and it was so good, I wanted to keep it forever. But
I like the bug where you could kill Kat and she'd come back as a zombie.
I appreciate your patience and thank you for your time. Back to the mission. After sneaking my way through the valley, you're met with a team of civilians fighting off waves of Covenant thralls. While you can simply avoid these people and let them die meaningless deaths, I opted instead to help them defend their home and clear out the remaining forces. After some talking, it turns out these men are black arms dealers who smuggled weapons throughout the countryside. While we were stationed with Noble to help hunt down these types, June insists we use them to further our own agenda and let them show us faster routes to the Dark Zone's origin. We fight, we die, we let them die after we fought too hard to have them not die, and pretty soon we're at the source of the blackout, a Covenant jamming array that hides their activity from satellite surveillance. We prep the batter, ready the cake, and preheat the oven for tomorrow's smashing surprise. After readying the charges, we push our way up the valley. Soon we're intercepted by a phantom carrying nothing but a few little foot soldiers, but after killing a few of them, we're finally pinned down by a couple of shade turrets up the ridge. We sneak our way around them, or punch your way through, as I guess I did, and then as we continue onward, we're finally given the reason they had something to hide, an entire Covenant fleet ready to attack the planet at a moment's notice. So, as we report back to Kat with our new findings, we ready for tomorrow, where the real party's about to begin. Morning, August 12th, 2552. UNSC deploys an amassing strike force to smother the Covenant presence before it's allowed to completely overwhelm the planet. Interesting fact, this was actually the first time in the game where the music from the original Halo games can be heard. Halo 3 was especially giving when it came to remasters of tracks from its predecessors, but considering we're given 3 whole missions before hearing any, honestly I just think it's something worth appreciating. After baking the cake, you're dropped off right in the heat of battle, and you begin the coolest fight in Halo's history. At least it would have been cool had we been able to actually play it. Unfortunately, we're not actually given control until after Kat crashes the only working car and your allies are left to fall to their deaths. So, we're instead forced to push up the ridge on foot. This mission actually grants you an entirely new toy from the sandbox right out the gate, the grenade launcher. This handy little trinket can bounce explosive rounds at enemies while diminishing shields and tasing vehicles. Considering the only weapon that could previously tase vehicles was the plasma pistol and the power drain, I think it's a welcome addition to the UNSC's arsenal of devastating firepower. And while a less capable soldier may decide to take advantage of this new opportunity, I opted instead to using the trusty DMR. As you headshot your way through the waves of grunts and jackals, your allies fight tirelessly to weaken their hold of the area on the ground below. While I was just ripping on the fact we can't experience the fight ourselves, I get the 360 probably couldn't have handled the load they were trying to put on it. This is actually something the developers like to call the imposter system. According to the Halo Wiki, this is a system of rendering where the objects at a distance are drastically reduced in texture and complexity to lighten the load needed to run it. This allows intricate battles like this to ensue while not sacrificing graphical fidelity. So this makes a bit more sense why we weren't able to engage in the battle ourselves. So I'll settle for our actions affecting the battle instead. Either way, this mission's just really cool. After hearing our remarks about how women can't drive, Command decided to reward our blatant misogyny with another toy, and this time it can shoot rockets. Though Swordbase saw the return of the Gauss Hawk from the previous games, this was a big deal for console players. Previously, the only iteration of Halo with a rocket hog was Halo CE for the PC made by Gearbox. Now we're finally able to experience what the PC players have been enjoying since 2003. Unfortunately, we can't really enjoy our new present. Though Bungie did bestow upon us this shiny new death machine, they failed to disclose the fact that every AI that isn't trying to kill you is still trying to kill you. Every friendly AI drives like an absolute Nimrod. They constantly drive off cliffs or strand you directly in the enemy's line of sight. So unless you're lucky enough to enjoy co-op, you might be stuck driving these dummies around like I was. Not to worry though, pretty soon we're faced with the real objective, taking out the AA gun stationed just beyond the ridge. This is where the merits of Reach's gameplay shines brightest. Most AAA titles would see such an objective as this trivial, while only providing a player a single lane to perform said objective. Not Reach. Bungie gave the players multiple ways to tip the sandbox in their favor. While you could perform the standard murder fest, pushing through on foot until the station's cleared, it's also just as viable to barrage the turret from afar with your rocket hog. This not only saves ammo for later, but offers the player the option to choose how they engage the story. It's a minor choice, sure, but to know that I have multiple lanes of engagement allows me to play around and experience the same story in different ways later on. If you notice, beyond the cliffs, you can actually see the burgeoning battle scaling the wastelands. Because of your actions, you're now allowed to witness the fruits of your labor, as frigates and longswords rain fire on the ground. It's also around this time you're shown your first encounter with scarabs in the entire game. While I'm sad we're only shown these hulking monsters from afar, I can still appreciate their inclusion in the game's overall story. There's also an interesting footnote I'll touch up on later, but for now, let's move on. After clearing a wraith and watching a deployable bridge defy physics, we're able to make our way to an old mining station where a troop of Marines is being pinned by plasma shells. Luckily, we're here to help. Since the station is lined with explosive canisters, it would stand to reason that we should be able to use our handy-dandy death machine to wipe out the horde of advancing fodder, right? Unfortunately, no. Well, you could, but at least I couldn't. Every time I tried to barrage the enemies on the bridge, my co-pilot thought it the perfect time to have their hand at the wheel. So, I was forced instead to attack the Cubbies from range, depleting what little ammo I had left along the way. By the time I did manage to push up, the Marines I came to aid were already dead. While this is a sad tragedy in terms of Noble's execution, I am actually given an opportunity to make up for this mistake later. Dot, Reach's planetary AI, informs us of a zealot meddling around in the mining station. While Carter orders you to focus on the spire itself, we are given full authority to exterminate them should we have the chance. Now it becomes a race against time. To face such a threat, I decided to test out a new piece of equipment, the hologram. This ability allows the player to project a duplicate version of themselves to a fixed location and ward off any pesky foes that might have their way might have it out for us. While the movement of this decoy isn't very convincing a good majority of the time, I still appreciate its inclusion. The AI seem to enjoy it well enough, and I've certainly fallen for them myself from time to time, so all around, I think it's a pretty good piece of equipment. Also, it's probably a good time to talk about the weapon you see me using here. May I present to you the needle rifle. This precision weapon grants the user pinpoint accuracy with an added bonus of watching their target combust before their very eyes. While the needler was, and is, always a formidable weapon to go against in PvP, I've never really been a victim of its combusting effect when versing the AI. I'm sure it has something to do with our shield story-wise, but in terms of gameplay, I'm going to guess that they just didn't want the player to feel cheated. Considering the weapon is fairly standard among the enemy ranks, I'd be pretty frustrated if it only took 3 shots to kill me instantaneously. Either way, it's a welcome new addition, and I wish for its safe return should 343 ever give it a chance in Infinite. After pushing up the stairs and dodging the barrage of Wraith fire, we make our way to the head honcho himself. While the average noob combo would work on the standard elite, the Zealot offers the challenge of advanced tactics and tougher shields. This combined with aid from their friends gives me little other option than cover and wait. After clearing the target and regaining sprint, we push up to yet another Really? After going back and filming another take, we're granted the new Covenant weapon, the Plasma Launcher. A Covenant heavy weapon that after charging launches a set of 4 tracking plasma grenades that stick onto the target and detonate with extreme impertinence. I do think this weapon is fun when in PvP, but admittedly I don't really care much for it in PvE, so there's probably a good reason why past me didn't really want to do that. Considering Reach saw the return of the rocket tracking from Halo 2, I think it is only fair that Covenant be granted something with a tracking explosive as well. The Fuel Rod is definitely a great contender in terms of the rockets, but who would trade a gun that tracks for a gun that bounces? After stealing a Revenant and clearing the scouts along the way, we're tasked with the destruction of another AA gun. This time, I decided to commandeer another Wraith and execute the turret from the outside. However, if you parkour your way up this bridge, you can actually get on this half-destroyed Warthog and gun it down from a distance. This does diminish the return of another enemy, but I think it best to save them for their proper reveal. We're granted reinforcements, offered a lift via Falcon, and we're flown through one of the developers' most annoying parts of the game, the rail shooter. As we run through a 3/4 mile trench run, we finally push through to the spire eluding our electronic surveillance. Unfortunately, the spire is coated with a shield that immediately emped the ride we came in on. After bracing for impact and tumbling across the sands, we're finally treated to what I believe may be the best inclusion in Reach's roster yet, the jetpack. This bad boy gives the player the ability to traverse the skies without aid of Banshee or Falcon. While this was a great inclusion in my opinion, there definitely did come some drawbacks. The levels had to essentially be built around the jetpack instead of just including it at random. The boundaries had to be scaled up and its inclusion had to be diminished as to keep players from exploiting it too often. This ability gave ample freedom via multiplayer, but potentially limited the scope of player freedom further on in the campaign. While this isn't a negative per se, I thought it worth pointing out since the people who worked on it did so with that intent. Gotta show some appreciation for the creator sometimes, you know what I mean? Also, if you're watching this, hey. After popping heads and punching shields, we're finally pushing the multiplayer map that's milked throughout MCC's invasion mode. While Doc goes on about the supposed purpose of these towers, I tune it out because we'll destroy it long before that's a concern. The spire is surrounded by a swarm of patrolling enemies and stationed fuel rod turrets. While I would have preferred keeping my hands on the grenade launcher from earlier, Bungie, I still made do with a steady hand and a couple dozen needle rounds to the head. A couple dozen dead grunts later, we push up the lift to the top of the spire. Also, to those interested, this is actually the first mission in Reach where you can take control of a Banshee. While they have appeared in every mission thus far, aside Nightfall in some capacity, the jetpack gives you the option to jump off the side like a suicidal maniac and take these hovering hellspawn for a test drive. I don't prefer doing it in this way, but I just thought it worth mentioning considering it's an option. After being cut down a couple dozen times, we finally disable the shield so the frigates can rain hellfire on the invaders. As the spire collapses into rubble, we can finally rest easy knowing the planet is safe.
New contact.
No, somebody tell me this ain't happening.
UNSC frigate Grafton. Do you copy?
Grafton is dust. We need to get out of here now.
Another day, another loss. The sun sets to find Noble Team beaten and battered as they shield themselves from the sweeping Covenant patrols. The attack on the Spire was a bust, expending most of the planet's offensive resources, and all they can do now is pick up the pieces and wait for backup, provided there's still anything left to back up when they do finally arrive. While our Spartans are under the desolate wastes, Kat and Carter swap banter while they conjure their next course of action. Before we continue on explaining the plot, I would like to go on another tangent, so just bear with me on this one. When Bungie sat down to develop this game, they had a real problem approaching Reach's story. When they did agree on leaning away from John's story from the books, they couldn't really give the player much reason to care for these characters more than they could John himself. And for good reason. By 2007, we'd stepped into the boots of Master Chief and cleared hundreds of thousands of alien dropships for almost a decade at this point. We know these characters, we love these characters, we saw them go through hell to save humanity, and the feeling of loss when we said goodbye was no laughing matter. To make this audience care and relate to these characters, knowing damned well we're never gonna make it out, was a monumental task, and it was because of this challenge that they opted to show Noble Team's faces instead. The art team had to painstakingly craft some of the most realistic faces the old gen could handle, and even then, it would still be an uphill battle. So, to better their odds of connecting with the team, we're given these moments you see here. The quiet before the storm. The silent moments between each mission that actually let you appreciate what you're doing. Through context clues and body language, we're shown these characters are more than just caricatures. Even when George talks to June, he notes how their plans always come together, cementing the relationship that both Kat and Carter share with each other, putting it in our minds that this isn't the first time they've ever done this. As Kat and Carter cement their relationship through battle plans, Kat debriefs the rest of Noble on a makeshift plan that, hypothetically, cleared the skies of the supercarrier in orbit above the planet. All they'd need is a ship, a bomb, and a pilot. While the nukes on Reach were all shut down, they did have an alternative approach. By rigging a slip space drive, they could open up a wormhole that would, if successful, warp half the ship to oblivion while what's left of the UNSC could clear out the remaining Covenant outposts stationed on the planet. While some of that was easily attainable, they would still need a pilot, but luckily, they have us. As Kat gladly informs us, before being assigned to Noble, we actually used to be a pilot for an experimental series of fighters that have a launch site conveniently located near Noble's position. As Kat draws out the plans that the art team wouldn't let us see, Carter relays Holland to request approval for the suicide mission. This is why their relationship was so important to point out. Carter was always depicted as a by-the-books commander, sticking to protocol as much as he could, so much so that he could quote the Winter Contingency's civilian interference policies to Halsey herself. He sticks up for Kat because she's a valuable member of the team, and it's because of her significance that he agrees to this unsanctioned, reckless plan. But, knowing the odds, it's probably the only chance they've got. So with that, we're off. As the morning comes and the plans are set, we're left to push off to what I like to call the E3 moments. While this is a term I came up with, I really can't say it's unwarranted. These moments are parts that felt included to make the player feel more engaged and keep them invested throughout these cool moments. One example could be sweeping through the halls on the relay station or the Falcon ride from earlier, but here is certainly where it's the most deserved. We're given a chance to push up the beach in Halo's own version of Saving Private Ryan. As drop pods of elites crash before us, aerial fighters known as Seraphs bombard the launch station from afar. Fun fact, while the Seraph was a new addition to the universe, it was never intended to be an aerial vehicle. During the early days of CE, the Seraph was intended to be a heavy tank that would rival the UNSC's own Scorpion. However, after Bill Gates signed off on the company, they had to cut it out until bringing it back for a small appearance in Halo 2. As the waves of spirits and drop pods reinforced the usurping threat, we're finally made to push up to the launch station where we can put this mission into action. However, should the brave few of you dare to try to face this onslaught yourself, I'm afraid to say you're going to be met with failure. While pushing up to the base is possible, the waves of alien thralls will never cease their attack. Until you push your way into the base and prep yourself for launch, the enemies will continuously spawn and try to stop you from reaching their flagship. As you push into the base, potentially wiping out the Wraith attacking your fragile marines along the way, you clear the sole remaining enemy and are greeted with the prettiest thing I've seen in the entire game thus far, the Saber. This little beauty is the humans' final solution to fighting the Banshees and Seraphs that harass the skies. They're equipped with chain guns, rockets, and recharging shields to protect their pilots against plasma fire. While it would have been amazing to see these babies implemented into multiplayer, as Bungie originally intended, I still think it was cool to finally experience what space combat could have been like in Halo's world, and hopefully Destiny's world as well. Carter orders you and Noble 5 to launch the Saber while the rest of Noble Team regroups to help the forces on the ground. As you make your way up the ramp, we strap ourselves in to witness one of the coolest transitions this game has ever seen. Fun fact, this cutscene actually uses 5 different skyboxes when entering the exosphere. This gave the transition much more impact and added to my sense of immersion overall. However, this doesn't really impact the gameplay all too much. I just thought it was an interesting tidbit.
Also, wait, is that High Charity?
As we get acquainted with the controls, we're finally given free reign to defend Anchor 9 from the impending attack of fighters lingering just outside the kill zone. Remember how I said I wish I could have seen space combat multiplayer? Well, I failed to mention that MCC actually did allow you to have forgeable sabers and seraphs to duke it out over Forge World. And what I failed to mention was, after playing around with a friend, I kind of realized how fast these things can go, and I think I understand why Bungie cut this part from the game. Honestly, this mission, while being the prettiest skybox I've ever seen, it's my least favorite to play. On harder difficulties, the enemy swarms and guns you down with no room for cover or evasion because it's the openness of space. What are you gonna do? Your shields and health do recover, but unless you're willing to hide behind the base like a little coward, you're going to have an annoying time trying to fight these guys on Legendary. Finally, after surviving all they threw at us, we're called back to base to dock so George can depart and join the Splinter team meant to escort the bomb. As George makes his perfect leap of faith, we watch helplessly as the ground below is leveled through Covenant nukes. He asks about Sword Base, and unfortunately, their survival is a mathematic improbability. George reacts with pain in his voice as he grabs onto the neighboring platform. This is where George's real character shines through. Remember how I said Halsey kidnapped all these children and molded them into the Spartan 2s we know today? Well, I failed to mention that George was actually one of those Spartan 2s. George was a toddler when he was forced into this program, same as John. These kids were taken from their homes and forced into military service. George had no home, no parents, no friends outside of his troop, but he had Halsey. Halsey, as callous as she was, did her best to make the children feel comforted and felt accountable for them when they'd succumb to the hellish experiments. While she is a monster by almost every metric, she did her best to be somewhat of a mother figure to these indoctrinated children. However, the Spartan 3s never had that luxury. They were trained behind Halsey's back by order of Oni's top brass. They were sent on suicide mission after suicide mission, coming from homes that had already been taken from them due to the Covenant's relentless campaign. While they were given the opportunity to enlist themselves, it didn't change the fact that they didn't have anywhere to go. What they had is what they got. So it's because of this humanity that Halsey showed to him that he cares so much more than the rest of Noble. While his counterparts are less inclined to show as much compassion, George was taught how much a tender soul can put one at ease. So to watch the planet he called home, housing Halsey, the one he called family, get reduced to cinders as he hovers in orbit powerless to help, honestly, it's not surprised that he's as noticeably as upset as he is. Honestly, I feel for his pain more than anything. He's the big hulking teddy bear, we can't help but love him, but unfortunately, we don't really have time to grieve, because after all, we have a job to do. As we push off and regroup, we're escorted by the UNSC Savannah to finally begin Operation Uppercut. The mission is simple. While the smaller teams would latch on and hijack the vessel, the Savannah would distract the Corvette long enough for them to take control from within. After that, we ready the bomb, detach the Pelican, and ready for surface aid to the remaining ground forces. All that's left now is to carry it out. We take out the engines, clear out the scouting party, and sneak aboard the Corvette to give our boys free reign over the hangar. After wiping out the people smart enough to keep their helmets on, George finally lands in the Pelican and sets up for a defensive strike. Meanwhile, we push up with our remaining friendlies and go to take out the control room. As we push through the maze of tunnels, the Savannah cries for help as the Corvette rains fire from its starboard. While I tried to stop the gunner with an assassination, there wasn't really anything I could do. The Savannah's crew cries into the void as its vessel is left lifeless, drifting through the empty void of space. They did their best to get us here, so we'll do our best to honor their sacrifice. As we enter the room, we're greeted by stationed elites and grunts manning their posts as the captain circles the map of the planet. If you notice, there's actually a bunch of yellow dots hovering above the surface. While this could be important later, we're kinda strapped for time, so unfortunately we don't really have time to pay attention. After clearing the room, we fire the engines, or what's left of them I guess, and watch the flagship creep closer towards its own demise. We make it back to the Pelican, but unfortunately we're greeted with waves of enemies trying to halt our plans of escape. After taking a hit and using a secret turret, George gives us the green light that the Pelican's online and ready to go. We're finally able to arm the bomb and make our way home. All in a day's work.
Distance is closing on this vessel's refueling track with the Covenant supercarrier. 76 seconds to endpoint.
So, it's gonna be like that. Well, I got good news and bad news. This bird took some fire and our thruster gimbal is toast, which means the only way off this slag heap is gravity.
And the good news?
That was the good news.
At current velocity, 53 seconds to endpoint.
Yeah. Bad news is, time is fried. I'm gonna have to fire it manually.
That's a one-way trip.
We all make it sooner or later. Better get going, Six. They're gonna need you down there. Listen, Reach has been good to me. Time has come to return the favor. Don't deny me this. Tell her to make it count.
Slip space rupture detected.
Gamma station control, reading multiple pings below the orbital.
Slip space rupture detected.
Yeah, we're picking up anomalies too. Are you reading
Slip
it?
space rupture detected.
Multiple Covenant signatures.
Slip space
Does anyone have a
rupture
big?
detected.
They're everywhere.
Slip space rupture detected.
The whole damn Covenant
Slip
fleet.
space rupture detected.
Alright, I've been editing this now for about a month. I think I've earned a little bit of a tangent. So, originally, in the time that I was doing this, I was hoping that I could have this done before Halo Infinite dropped, just so I could have, like, you know, this is the hype train, get that blood flowing. But that didn't happen, because finals happened. But in that time, I managed to read Fall of Reach, First Strike, Contact Harvest, Ghosts of Onyx, Shadows of Reach, Halsey's Diary. I skipped the Flood, but I own the Flood, and I own Cold Protocol, and I'm only like 3 chapters into that one, but for what I hear is not really anything too relevant to it and regarding this game, so I'm thinking about skipping it. Basically, what I have learned is that everything was in a tight continuity, and the fact is that Halsey did not know at the time of this that they were making Spartan 3s. Now, she was aware that they were Spartan 3s, and she was aware of the fact that they were Spartans, and that was her armor, but she doesn't know who made it, she doesn't know how they were made, and she doesn't know where they came from. All they know is the fact of once they come up in sword base, they're like, oh, those are Spartans. Fuck. So yeah, that's a thing. Also, I want to talk about the fact that I went on a little tangent about it earlier, but all of these guys, all of Noble Team, these are like tortured kids. There's barely anything on them. The person who has the most stuff on them is Kat, because she had a live action trailer regarding her backstory where the original Noble 6 died. But this, we don't got anything else. This is all we got. Basically, everyone else, you just gotta take it face value, but here we are. Here we go. All that research, what do I have? Contact Harvest is really horny. Back to the video. So that's it. We did it. The Long Night of Solace is out of commission. The mission was a success. After all that planning, after all that effort, after everything we went through, we did it. So why is this happening? The problem is it clearly wasn't enough. We lost more than we could afford. A fleet, a frigate, a Spartan. Each was imperative on their own merit, but now, honestly, I'm not really sure what all there is left to lose. Still, the best thing we can do now is try to pick ourselves up, brush ourselves off, and try to keep fighting for the sake of the planet. With the pistol as our only option, we limp back to civilization and hope there's something left to fight for. We're not really out yet, but there's gotta be something out there left to save. August 23rd, 2552. 9 days following Uppercut's completion. After pushing through the wilderness to the countryside, we finally make it to the prophesied civilization. May I present to you the crown jewel of Reach's populace, New Alexandria. Oh god. Yeah, this is a perfect symbol of Reach's success and prosperity. Smoldering, frantic, dead. Well, it's not quite dead yet at least. That gives us a chance. It's slim, but we don't really have many options open to us. After sneaking through the occupied streets and dropping into the boardwalk, we're greeted to more of the Metroplex's grandeur being reduced to a pile of molten ash. Falcons sear past you as the bodies of the locals cover the ground. We proceed to help the evacuation, but overhear talk of suicide grunts lining the passageways ahead. After carefully clearing the unaliving grunts, it's finally time we meet the tried and true enemies of old. The Brute. While their encounters definitely vary from game to game, this game decided to spin their usual take as hulking monkeys with exploding spikes to giant cannon fodder with exploding spikes. Honestly, these guys are a little bit too easy to kill. All you gotta do is just pop the hats off of them, and then it just takes one bullet to the head. They don't have shields, they don't really have anything that really makes them a target, so quite frankly, it's just the same problem we had with Halo 3. And to be honest, this is probably my least favorite depiction of them in the entire franchise. Their overall aesthetic and prowess is cool, but I'll take charging idiots to chunky grunts any day. After clearing the way for the civilians that I definitely didn't try to kill, we travel down the elevator to aid the team of ODSTs trying to clear the landing pad just ahead. All that's stopping them is a wall of enemies and a bottomless drop. So, we're out to grab a jetpack. Interesting fact, you can actually manage to clear this entire section without using the jetpack. MCC even offers an achievement for doing so, but it's hard and time consuming, and I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to do it. But you guys can have fun doing that on your own time if you wanted to do that. We hop our way across the gorge, pop the hats off the brutish baddies, and finally make it up the side. Oh my god, fine! We turn around to finally make it topside. God. After clearing some dropships and dodging some civilians, we finally fight our way up the stairs to the end of the landing pad. This is also a good time to show off the baddest of the baddies, the Chieftain. While the other Drohane may have been reduced to walking cannon fodder, these Goliaths are not to be trifled with. Their hammer, their shields, their weapon, each one is relatively menacing, and each one could definitely knock you on your ass. So naturally, we punch them to death like we would any other enemy. We pop the shades, clear the pad, and regroup the Falcons to reactivate the AA defenses. We're saluted by our Helljumper buddies as we say goodbye, and push on to finish the fight. This is another moment I'd like to draw some attention to. Do you remember any turret crawl scenes from the original games? Any scenes that existed to make you focus on what was being presented? Aside the overlays from Halo 3 or the elephant defense from ODST, I can't really think of any either. That being said, look at what we're shown. Civilians being gunned down in mass, Marines being pinned by swarming brutes, Banshees harassing the air, and Corvettes raining hellfire down below. We're finally seeing what the original games never could. We're seeing how powerless we really are. We always saw ourselves as this invincible automaton with endless shields and a thirst for alien blood. But look at this. Look at what's unfurling in front of us. This is one of Reach's richest cities on the UNSC's most defended planet. In a matter of days, it's been reduced to a blazing hellscape of scalding plasma and burnt corpses. And despite everything we've done thus far, there's still nothing we can do. Only sit back and watch as their screams fuddle through the microphone. As a civilian transport crashes into the ocean, we're finally able to continue the firefight to another PvE map. This level is actually a pretty great example of Halo's fluid level design. Despite being map reused for firefight, we're actually given multiple lanes to launch the batteries. While pushing up the stairs is equally viable, you could just as easily press the button, sneak around with a jetpack, and launch the missiles without killing a soul. It's not easy, but it's there. It's not relevant to the plot in any way, just thought it was worth appreciating is all. We cleared the baddies, armed the batteries, and barraged the sky so the civvies can fly. After taking out the Corvette's guns, Kat finally makes radio contact and sends for an escort.
We're getting nothing from George.
He didn't make it.
Understood.
After signaling for evac, we're finally on our way to regroup with the rest of Noble. Maybe then we can begin to sort out some of this mess. Evening, August 23rd, 2552. We see ourselves escorted via Pelican to rendezvous with what's left of Noble Team. Earlier, I made mention to how the game utilizes a writing technique called dramatic irony. And before we go any further into the story, I'd like to teach you another term, Chekhov's gun. This term serves the purpose of helping define an overall structure in the narrative. The saying goes, if you have a gun hanging on the wall in Act 1, it must go off by Act 3. So in layman's terms, if you write something into being, you better make good use of it. This isn't too relevant in the moment, but I still think it's a pretty cool term. Back to dramatic irony though. Throughout this video, I often wrote it as though we were stepping into the boots of Noble 6 rather than just observing. But the problem is that we aren't Noble 6. They are their own person. They might be wearing our armor, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're the same person. It's been shown before that we don't know everything about our own character. They made the discovery of the Covenant on Reach. They witnessed Sorbase's incursion. They saw the Grafton's destruction, and they were there to see George's final moment of triumph. So think about what they must be going through right now. What thoughts must be rushing through their head. They went up into space and fought through waves of hell just so they could finally end the skirmish on Reach. But they didn't. After all that they sacrificed, they just delayed the inevitable. I can't imagine there's anything else they could endure that would cut deeper than that. All these lives lost, all these families separated, and to them, this whole thing is their fault. So to watch the slow pan of the city's ruins burning in the night sky, I couldn't really imagine a more fitting score. As we exit the Pelican and meet up with Carter, we're finally given our next set of orders and sent on our way.
It's good to have you back. Sorry I came alone. Make him proud.
Cat relays over comm that scattered relay jammers are covering the city, and it's up to you to take them out. Wait, then how is she contacting us right now? Wouldn't it make more sense to have Carter relay this information to us? I mean, they were literally right just there.
We can't hear Holland, and he can't hear us.
Oh, it's with command. It's a small nitpick, sure, but it's still a strange thing to have written in there. As you begin the level, you're finally given a chance to drive the Falcon. This vehicle is an aerial equivalent to UNSC's Warthog and an adversary to the Covenant Banshees, as well as a replacement for the Halo 3's Hornet. While the campaign variant is equipped with a chain gun for the pilot, the multiplayer version decided to do away with it, opting instead to have the pilot mule around the passengers. Luckily, the MCC finally gave us the ability to forge these Mystic vehicles, as well as some new variants, but I'm still baffled as to why they cut them out in the first place. Also, if you play this mission in co-op, you're given one of these new variants with a grenade launcher, similar to the one we used during the Spire's Valley Crawl. There's also a variant that only carries passengers, which is only used in the earlier missions. I think this is probably my favorite, but I admit it serves no purpose in matchmaking, and I only use it to get laughs in custom games. Either way, we strap ourselves in, take off, and begin our sweep of the city. Honestly, I remember my first time playing this mission as a kid, and I was blown away by the scale of this mission. And to this day, I still can't fully wrap my head around the fact that we can do this. How did Bungie even get away with this? There's really nothing stopping you from just scaling the city from end to end. Halo has always been a bastion of creating vast missions, but very rarely were we given the option to just roam it as we pleased. Depending on the direction you fly, you're likely to play out the mission very differently in order than someone else did. It's another reason why, even a decade later, this game is still so fun to play. The mission offers a variety of side missions between each main objective, but our main priority right now is the hospital, the plaza, and the club. After takeoff, Cat orders us to back up a squadron of Marines assigned to clearing the hospital, so it's up to us to save the day. It's not long after you can see how devastated the city really is. Not even a minute into the game and an amassing skyscraper just crumbles into the smoky depths of the city's underbelly. Needless to say, this isn't looking too good. We shoot a Shade, blast a Banshee, and descend onto the landing pad to aid our frail Marines. As we make our way inside, we're blessed to a sight of sleeping grunts and a hovering engineer. Honestly, while I could go on a tangent about the engineer's history, involvement, overall role in the Covenant, I'd rather just skim it since they really don't serve much narrative importance apart from ODST. All they really offer is added shields to the weird Covenant occupying the planet. I would, however, like to point out this cute little Easter egg.
It's funny, but I dream in English.
As we clear the campers and shoot the shields, we fight our way downstairs and push onto the, I actually have no idea what this is called. A hallway? A corridor? Either way, we're killing shit. We clear the brutes, kill another engineer, and finally regroup with the pinned Marines. Wait, you're telling me they were right next to this thing the whole time, and they still needed our help? Why couldn't they just throw a grenade or something? It's not like they're prisoners or anything. Why would they get this far only to stop at the jammer? And furthermore, why would the Covenant have sleeping units upstairs when they could just rush their position and clear the Marines anyway? This part never made much sense to me, but fine. I'll suspend my disbelief for the sake of my enjoyment. As we deactivate the jammer, our escape is interrupted by elite rangers hopping across the air. I know this video has been riddled with tangent after tangent, but Reach did this thing with the elite ranks that I feel should be addressed, and if I don't talk about it now, I'm gonna have to talk about it later, so might as well get over it now. In CE, Bungie gave elites a distinct color depending on the rank that they held. Blue for miners, red for majors, cyan for stealth, black for spec op, and gold for zealots. Each had their own distinct features and playstyle, but the biggest difference was their shields, with miners having the weakest, zealot the highest, and the stealth having none at all. Halo 2 continued this trend but added on to it. Excluding the heretic variants, the ranks now included rangers, ultras, counselors, and honor guards, including variants of each one. Halo 3 was exclusively friendly elites, so I'm going to negate the ranking system there, but Reach decided to take its hierarchy into a different approach. Now we have miners, rangers, infiltrators, officers, ultras, zealots, generals, and field marshals. Aside from the field marshal and the zealot similarities, each elite now has its own unique armor set to distinguish itself from the other variants. This was done to make the Covenant feel more alien and add a further sense of eeriness to the enemy invaders. While I did have some issues with the implications this had on the overall canon of the Covenant power structure, I still think these are some of the best iterations of these beasts to fight. I just wish 343 didn't rely on these new takes on their armor as heavily as they did. Okay, tangent over. I know this video is getting long, so I'll try to keep it shorter going forward. We clear those foolish enough to oppose us and make our way back to the Falcon. As we launch ourselves skyward, the sky begins to rumble as a Covenant cruiser descends above the city. It perches itself just above the skyline as it rains plasma on the surface. In previous entries, we heard mentions of what happened here, and we saw what glassing could look like in Halo 3 and ODST, but this is different. This is nothing like what we saw before. While Halo 3 alluded to South Africa's glassing, we never really got to see what it looked like past the clouds. But now we can. Honestly, it's horrifying. This was the fate of every colony before it. This is what was deemed righteous by the aliens hell-bent on our destruction. When you stop and look at it, it's baffling to fully quantify and rationalize the destructive capacity these people have, let alone use. It makes you wonder how we ever stood a chance to begin with. One ship from our fleet could combat a Spire, but one of their battleships can reduce a metropolis to basically nothing. Still, we can't let that stop us. We have our own mission to focus on. We clear a landing pad before being called to reinforce soldiers fighting their way to the jammer at Club Herrera. This would be a good time to show off another Easter egg. If you maneuver your Falcon into a series of buttons around the city, you can actually turn this battle into a blast. The enemies decide against killing one another and opt instead to let DJ Brute rock out on the beat. As you also press another button, you can change the music to something a little more nostalgic. Again, just a pretty cool find is all, nothing really too big. Back to the story though. As you push into the remastered version of a firefight level from ODST, you're shown a platoon being pinned by 4 hunters guarding the jammer. You see, this makes more sense than the last one. So, as per tradition, we punch the Goliath straight into the afterlife. We walk up the stairs, prime the jammer, and pat ourselves on the back for another job well done. The Covenant decided to downplay all your efforts thus far by glassing another portion of the city. Jerks. As we continue fighting from the air, a familiar voice hails us from the comm.
Copy, Gunnery Sergeant. Go ahead.
My guys got caught in a firefight in the Nobilos Tower. Roof collapsed. I gotta get over there and get them out.
Solid copy. Nova 6 will escort your Falcon to the tower.
Oh, fuck. We're assigned to escort our old Helljumper buddy from an evac center as we rock out to some tasty jams. After we escorted the sergeant to the zone, we took a bit too much damage trying to look cool in front of him. But not to worry though, Bungie thought ahead by giving you a way to call in a new vehicle. All you have to do is park, get out, and watch as you complicitly allow your fellow soldiers to free fall into the molten void below. After getting our new ride, we're hastily asked to help a squad in distress. We lose communication just before they could finish, but we still have our target, the Synovian Center. According to the wiki, this facility actually is a planetary hub for creating the newest vessels in the UNSC fleet. In truth, the only nod we really have to this was a hologram in the foyer, but it's still a pretty cool lore fact. We clear the shades, bash some brains, and pop the hats of the brutish Jirahane. As we make our way up the elevator and hear another music Easter egg, we're met with nothing. No enemies, no defenses, nothing. I guess whatever we killed downstairs was all there was. Well, guess there's no use in checking. We begin to explore the halls of the remastered classic when we discover a sole survivor. He clutches his gun, spewing ramblings of a suicidal maniac.
I am out! Seriously, we're fighting aliens now? Indies were bad enough, now we got freaking aliens? Not me, man. I'm out. O-U-T out!
Nah, I'm just kidding. We killed him a lot before we heard what he was talking about. As we jump down to deliver a righteous dessert, we deactivate the jammer and make our way back.
It's a trap. Get the hell out of there!
Oh yeah, these little insects are called drones, an insect-like species designated to swarm and overwhelm their enemies. This game sought to add them in fewer places than previous installments, but gave the player an added bonus of giving them an exploding animation whenever you score a headshot. Honestly, if we weren't running for our lives right now, I'd pop these things like little bubble wrap. It's so satisfying. Luckily, on lower difficulties, these enemies don't really pose much of a threat to the player. It's actually quite possible to clear the entire area of the buzzing hostiles. Still, this couldn't have been a cooler way to show off their strength in numbers approach. As we make our way back down, we're finally on our way to regroup with the rest of Noble Team. Problem is, Kat forgot to hide her IP address and got traced back to Oni HQ. If only I had a sponsor that was able to accurately hide your IP address. Nah, I'm just kidding. I don't have any sponsors. We're called to Olympic Tower to clear the station shade turrets, and give our boys free path for evac. God, that was a hard word to say. As the last Pelican launches, we drop onto the retracting landing pad and are shown what's left of our distinguished team. We're finally back to normal. June scouting, Kat tinkering, Carter judging, Meal, I don't know,
brooding, I guess. As Jules solemnly nods to their fallen friend, Emil chuckles at the detest of everyone else. It's honestly really hard to tell whether their relationship was on good terms or not, but there is actually some combat dialogue for Emil where he kills in remembrance.
This one's for George, bastard.
There's also lines paying homage to his lost brother.
My brother gave his life so I could escape the Covenant. What kind of brother would I be if I didn't collect on that debt?
This lets me think he isn't as aggressive as we initially take him for, but I will say those playing this on a casual level may not notice the nuance of his character like I have.
Don't take this personally, but chances are very good that you won't survive to see the end of this war.
June asks Carter about Gauntlet, Red, and Echo Team being assigned to aid in the evacuation of Reach. At first I thought they were talking about that Red Team, but turns out it was a different outfit, which makes sense considering the timeline, but still kinda sucks we can't see Jerome going at it. As Carter scolds them for their breach of protocol, Kat asks a shockingly blunt question, one that's never really reflected on.
You want to know if we're losing?
I know we're losing. I want to know if we've lost.
As Holland risks our lives to give us orders, we're intercepted by Kat's MacGuffin that warns of radiation closing fast.
Source?
Airborne. Close.
How close?
That close!
As Kat is blinded by the nuke, Carter relays our new orders. We're to destroy any remnants of Sword Base to keep the Covenant from reaching Halsey's research. Gotta love when Command risks your life with orders to risk it further. As we race into the Fallout bunker, we can finally make our way to the Scarab Crawl out of New Alexandria.
Come on, get in! Let's go, come on!
So, here we are. The blunt end of Chekhov's gun. The field marshal we let out way back when finally came back to bite us in the ass, killing our tech liaison in the process. The worst part about it is, it's the reality of war. Not everyone can have an honorable, ceremonious death. While some can risk it all and give their lives for the good of the cause, some are just as easily lost in the crossfires with nothing really to show for it. Kat was by no means a nameless character, but she deserved better than this. A stray shot was all it took, an abrupt end to someone who held a pivotal role in Noble's dynamic. Now 4 is all that remain. There's not much else we can do about it, but it's becoming ever more clear that our time is dwindling, and it's becoming more and more apparent that Reach is on its last leg. August 29th, 2552. 3 days following Noble's extraction from New Alexandria. We're assigned a small platoon of ODSTs to infiltrate Sword Base and oversee its destruction. While the damage left was extensive to say the least, the Covenant still eagerly searched through the ruins of Sword Base. Whatever it is, it can't be good, so it's our job to keep it from reaching them. As we prepare for the mission, you can hear Holland and Carter relay over comms the mission directive. It's pretty clear that Carter is audibly upset after Kat's loss, which, in fairness, is pretty understandable. The two were practically inseparable and they were a crucial part of what made Noble work, but now he's just left to push his feelings aside as he finishes his new directive. Still, there's not much else we can do except try to grin and bear it. The mission comes first, so it's time to get to work.
6, are you in position?
Affirmative.
Good. Execute.
As the mission finally begins, we're able to see the consequences of Covenant's glassing. The skies are clouded with smoke and ash, while the once breathtaking ice caps are left as nothing more than a mere memory. There's honestly quite little to recognize from our last engagement, and it's pretty cool to see how everything ties together narratively. I just wish the circumstances were a little bit better. As we clear the infantry blocking the way, we're now gifted a ceremonious tank mission renowned throughout the franchise. While I think it's weird that there's just a convenient tank sitting here behind cover, I noticed the tank's cannon actually pays homage to George by inscribing his Sierra number along the side. Actually, if you go into Forge and toy around with the MCC assets, you're actually able to see Noble's insignia plastered across the Pelicans too. This actually implies that most of the equipment deployed thus far has been solely for your use, but I just thought it interesting, doesn't really tie into anything. As we group up with the ODST buddies and blast our way to victory, we're finally in position to take out the A8 guns impeding our attack. You know the drill, 2 lines of engagement, whatever, blah blah blah. But there's actually a different way of going about this, slightly. While this is the obligatory tank mission and every Halo has to have it, there are some people that find the tank sluggish.
I hate the tank. I don't like
It's bad. I don't like it.
So if you're looking for a more agile way to take them out, you're in luck. There's actually a pair of Revenants conveniently located by the tank's original hiding spot. There's also a way to spawn in a squadron of Banshees, but I don't think the game lets you win if you do that, so I'll refrain from that for the time being. Whichever you prefer is equally valid, but I prefer the tank for brevity's sake. As we blast the turrets into hunks of scrap, the remnants of Noble are finally able to make their way towards the base. Unfortunately for them, they're shot down by a series of AA shades just beyond the cliffs. Luckily no one is hurt, except for the pilot, but the exit strategy just isn't looking too great for us. As we clear the shades and pry the doors, we regroup with Noble to push back the way we came. Making our way into the garage, Carter informs us that the elevator's shot, so it's time for us to push our way through maintenance. After passing some tiny friends, grabbing a sword, and popping some nosy jackals, Dot leads us through the security terminal from our initial run of the base. Most of the previous Halos up to this point were no stranger to revisiting altered variant levels, but this feels oddly unnerving. The clean, stoic facility of old has been juxtaposed with the shattered glass and sparking lights. It's kind of a perfect metaphor of what's become of the planet if you think about it. There's some recycled screens, but we can look past that for now. Perusing the dilapidated hallways into the skyline from earlier, we find the lobby infested with hinge-head cloakers and a menacing general. Now that all those guys are clear, we're finally able to blow this place back to hell. After sidestepping our fallen friends and making our way to the location, Noble's just left scratching their heads as to why this is the actual detonation site. But after some confirming with Dot, we're actually given a new spot to plant the explosives.
Please confirm.
Revised?
By an AI of unknown origin, whose clearance is well above my own.
Well, it's pointing us a click and a half east and 2,000 feet underground.
I didn't bring my shovel, Commander.
Luckily for us though, Oni thought this was a perfect place to hide a secret passage into the real purpose of Sword Base.
Alright, we came this far. Your new AI friend tell you anything else, Dot?
She's been expecting you.
As we make our way down a tram with more geometry than CE's entirety, we're greeted by a familiar face.
Apologies for the unusual security measures, Commander, but the stakes demand it.
Dr. Halsey. Casualty reports have you listed as...
Yes, well, as they say, news of my death has been greatly exaggerated.
Halsey debriefs you on the new assignment. You're ordered to defend the doctor's lab while she adds the finishing touches to her research. There's also this giant alien thing across the gorge, but I don't really feel like asking about that right now. However, considering that our mission is still active, I don't necessarily think Carr's gonna go for this.
I don't think you understand. We're out of time. If it isn't portable when we reach you, it's gonna get buried.
Bury any of it, and you bury mankind's best chance for survival. Commander, you've been wondering what your Spartans died for? They died for this.
After regaining control, Command gives you access to a new series of automated defense turrets to aid you in defending the lab. I really think these turrets would have been a cool addition to Firefight or even some invasion maps, but sadly this is the only time we're really given access to them. Since I don't really prefer booking it across the level, I choose instead to arm myself with a vast cache conveniently located outside of Halsey's blast doors. After surviving all they threw our way, Halsey congratulates us on a job well done, and welcomes you back into the lab. For now though, I'm going to sidestep this so we can talk about this really cool Easter egg. If you and a friend press a series of buttons throughout the level, a door opens to find several sword elites exiting a nearby building. If you manage to clear them all out and make your way inside, it actually gives you full access to the lab. This room is actually called the Tribute Room, and quite frankly, it might be the most passionate addition to the entire game. It's filled with Easter eggs paying homage to the community that Bungie's built over the several years, and it's all written through the eyes of Halsey herself. It's a beautiful tribute to those who actually sought it out, but sadly we have a mission to complete, so we don't actually have too much time to read over it. After Carter yells at us for not coming quickly enough, the blast doors open and find Halsey chipping away at her console. Apparently, Sword Base was actually housing an amassing Forerunner artifact that will give us a cutting edge against the war on the Covenant, being examined by someone we might actually recognize. It's decided to have us, Noble 6, transported to the shipbreaking yard in Azad. There we'll be met with a Halcyon-class cruiser to take us off-world.
And what if we can't?
An apt question, if there were somewhere else to place our hope. There is not.
In truth, it's kind of weird how calm Halsey can be during all this, but I guess when you're faced with the end, nothing else really phases you at all.
Do you have it?
Yes.
Say the words, please.
I have it.
So, after readying the charges and making our way to the landing bay, Carter assigns June to escort Halsey back to Castle Base where the three of us deliver the package. This will be the last time we actually see June.
Good luck. You too, Rifleman. I need a heading, Dot.
At 3 kilometers north, turn right, heading 050. Small-scale air attacks have decimated many convoys en route. An armada of Covenant cruisers is hastening to the site as well. UNSC cruiser Pillar of Autumn is awaiting your arrival.
Wouldn't be a noble mission if it were easy.
Onward to freedom. Onward to the Pillar of Autumn. So here we are, the final chapter in Reach's story. Planet's doomed, our friends are gone, and we're humanity's only chance to keep any of it from being in vain. It's no understatement to say that the fate of all humanity rests on our shoulders. And, as to be expected, this will be the hardest mission we've faced thus far. While we dodge plasma fire from the incoming Banshees, we make our way to the cockpit to check on Carter.
You are alarming me.
Not sure how long she's gonna stay together. Skies are jammed up anyway. Gotta get you off her, Lieutenant.
Sir, you
don't want to hear it. Get the package to the Autumn.
Done.
Not yet, it's not.
As we say our final goodbyes to our commander, we prepare for a cliffside jump into the arid cliffs below.
6! That AI chose you. She made the right choice. On my mark. Mark!
After stumbling out of the Pelican and recharging our shields, we push ourselves onward to witness the Titanic vessel along the horizon. If you notice, you're actually able to see the remains of the other decommissioned ships just off in the distance. It's another small detail, but it gives more emphasis to this being a scrapyard. This plays a part into how it all ties together narratively, but let's focus on the task at hand. As Carter dodges the aerial attack, the two of us clear the small troops blocking the highway ahead. We fail to hear them beg, unload hot scores of lead, and hop into the Mongoose to make our way in style. Or a truck if you're feeling really ballsy. Soon after taking off, the Covenant drops dozens of flunkies and colossal scarabs to impede your way to the ship. While I would have liked to have boarded these things and take them out myself, I get the imperative nature of our mission canonically keeps us from doing so, and also it being more impactful when we get to do it later on. That being said, it's still a shame. After jumping the bridge and clearing the way, the mission runs into yet another hiccup.
Mother! We can get past this, sir.
No, you can't. Not without help.
Commander, you don't have the firepower.
I've got the math.
Solid copy. Hit them hard, boys.
You're on your own, Noble. Carter out.
Whoa. I'm honestly kind of speechless, to be honest. The other missions at least gave you a loading screen to digest what you just saw, but this one decided instead to just go ahead and keep rolling with the punches. While Noble's team's now left with 2, they don't really have much time to grieve. All they can do is just finish the mission before the planet takes them too. If there were ever a gameplay equivalent of show don't tell, I would definitely reference this as one of the best ways to do it. After swatting some bugs, we make our way to the boneyard to defend some helpless Marines. Fun fact, this is actually the biggest environment ever made for a single encounter in Reach. Luckily, if you want to, you don't actually have to fight these guys. You can just go around the stairs here and then climb your way up and avoid everything entirely. But if you're brave enough, you can actually man yourself in a forklift and drive right into the heat of battle. After clearing the shades and dropping into hell, we can finally begin whittling away at the occupying onslaught. Side note, I think it's really cool how creative this entire zone is. The facility was made to deconstruct retired starships, and the art team did a phenomenal job in making every room feel grounded. The scrap frigate we first encountered, the giant furnace, the girders and cranes that are placed in every corner, it just makes me feel like this is a real facility rather than a level just meant to make things interesting. I think the art team and level designers did a phenomenal job in creating all this, and it's really cool to find new ways to appreciate this level all these years later. After the mountains of graves we just filled, we finally made it, the Pillar of Autumn. Our ride is set and ready for pickup. All that's left now is to clear ourselves an LZ. While Emil handles the mass driver up ahead, we ravage ourselves through the waves of enemies impeding the way. Actually, if you find yourself low on ammo, there is actually a hidden cache of weapons just beyond this wall. Unfortunately, the MCC and Xbox One port of this game actually glitched this Easter egg, but if you're lucky, it works just fine. There's also a few things this level did that don't feel as coherent when sandwiched in with the rest of the story, so here's a rapid fire trivia for you. Brutes are only supposed to be on one level, but they work so well they decided to add them in more. They also have a custom exit animation on one drop. There's a silver chief in this area, and I'll talk about it later. The mass driver has a Emil Sierra number on the back. Spirits were decommissioned for being too expensive, apparently. Okay, that's pretty much everything. I think we can press through the story now. Once all the coveys are cleared, Keys finally gives us the green light to pick us up for the extraction. As he makes his way down, Emil gives you the nod that he isn't coming with you. I know it's easy to point out how someone needed to man the gun in order for them to get out of here, but I like to think this is how Emil decided to honor George, by never leaving Reach. As Keys secures the package, a Covenant cruiser makes his way to intercept the Autumn's launch. Not to worry though, Emil's got our back. One last cool fact here, there's actually a different dialogue depending on the difficulty.
Good to see you, Spartan. Halsey assured me I could count on you. Catherine assured me I could count on you.
This is, as it turns out, referencing the relationship they shared. Also, Miranda's Halsey's daughter. No, I will not elaborate further. Too bad the extraction is cut short by a phantom pushing its way through the gun. It beelines straight for Emil, and a gaggle of zealots pushes his way through him.
Who's next? I'm ready! How about you?
Lieutenant, get aboard! We gotta get the hell out of here!
Negative. I have the gun. Good luck, sir.
Good luck to you, Spartan.
Okay, we're short for time, we can't unpack things just yet. We got a line of zealots between us and the gun, so let's get to work. After the first few drop like flies, we're finally met with the one who started it all. The Field Marshal. The one who cut comms with the planet and sniped our friend from the air. Finally, we can get our revenge. Part of me wishes this could have been a boss fight of some sort, considering that the Elite was so centric to Reach's story, but I get the clock's kind of ticking right now, so we don't really have time to do that. So, after killing the only Elite to switch weapons mid-fight, we can finally push our way up the stairs and man the gun. While Emil's corpse is still there, we don't really have time to pay our respects. It's finally time to pay them back for what they did. This is actually one of the coolest part of Reach's gameplay. Operating a massive gun like this is incredible, but it's even more incredible the fact you don't even have to do it at all. That's right, if you don't feel like slaughtering all these flying foes hell-bent on your destruction, you can just easily wait it out until the cruiser gets into position for firing. I don't prefer doing it that way, but it's cool that it's an option. After the cruiser's finally neutralized, the Autumn can finally make its way for takeoff. It's here we can finally see the non-canonical reference to the one who started it all. But we did it. We actually did it. Humanity still has a fighting chance, and that's honestly the saddest reality of Reach's story. While the future finally holds a glimmer of light, we had to give up everything to save it. We won't know if what we did had any meaning, we won't know if we did the right thing, and we don't know if humanity ever made it out. But because of our sacrifice, we delayed our annihilation by one more day. And maybe that day was all we needed to win this war. August 30th, 2552, mere hours after the Autumn's departure from the planet. As it stands currently, we've exhausted every option. While we could find a cave to hunker in or an ODST to part with, our odds aren't looking too favorable. Look, I'll be totally honest, I wasn't really expecting to get this far. When I initially started this project, I half expected to just twiddle around and give back a quick thematic overview of Reach's narrative, but the deeper I went, the larger this video grew, the less in control I felt the project had become. It got to a point where I had no idea how I'd even end this thing or whether it'd end at all. I read all these books, watched all these documentaries, studied all these meanings, and at the end of it all, I was really no closer to understanding how this was going to turn out than when I started. But maybe that was for the best, because the deeper I got into this, the larger the undertaking had become. And the larger it became, the more valiant I had felt for coming out triumphant. In a way, I've come to realize that the journey of both me and Noble Six aren't actually that far apart. We both went into this new assignment with no real expectations as to what we'd undergo, but by the time we got the ball rolling, we were way too far in to pull out. And at the end of it all, we came out victorious, but at a tremendous cost. Noble Six with their life on the line, and me with a brimming knowledge of the Halo timeline that I can no longer even relate to those nearest to me. We knew what our hero was destined for the moment we started this story, yet we didn't really stop there. We trekked through the boots of a Spartan who'd go on to lose everything, but despite knowing the ending, we remained vigilant. We did not go quietly into the night. We faced our demons down with strength and vigor and refused to yield in spite of everything stacked against us. So, knowing all that, it's really only fitting that our final steps in these ragged boots be here. A mission with a goal we already know we can't complete. Survive. Not too long after starting, you're actually likely to come across a gaggle of corpses fitted with Mjolnir armor. These are... actually, I'm not really sure if they're all too important. They're randomly generated, so it's not like they're named characters or anything. I always assumed this was like the Gauntlet Red and Echo team, but there's no real confirmation of that either. What's more important is their quantity. Riddled across this level, there's actually 13 dead Spartans just sitting and waiting for you to join their numbers. This is actually meant for you to be the 14th corpse, referencing Bungie's obsession with the number 7. And even 343 carried on this tradition, so now I think it's just a Halo thing. Apparently, this references to how 7 is a lucky number in Western culture, but in truth, I don't really see it. The only lucky thing we've been given is night. Oh yeah! I forgot about that. This is probably the best mission to actually use night vision. While the battlefield is shrouded in dust and echoes, the green tint of our shattered visor actually illuminates the battlefield and helps us eliminate our enemies much more effectively than other missions prior. I felt the other missions were a bit too lit for this to be effective, but that also has something to do with my brightness settings, so take that as you will. There's also a lot of weapons scattered about that I could ramble on about, considering I haven't gone through all the armor effects or all the weapons, but sadly, even at your best, you're going to get overwhelmed. And here we are, the end of our heroic journey. Despite our efforts, despite our determination, despite our rigorous training and unbreakable resolve, we're unable to fight them all back. We fell. Without a team to save our skins, we succumb to the Zealot's dagger and become another tally on Reach's dearly departed. The worst part about it is the irony of it all. The Spartan from Reach died off-world, the brains of Noble lost her head, the sniper sidestepped his own demise, the captain went down with the ship, the CQC got stabbed in the back, and the lone wolf inevitably died alone. This mission was actually one of the most divisive among the Bungie staff. While many felt it a fitting end to your character's journey, others in the writer's room thought it was too bleak of an outcome for gamers to sit idly behind. Still, I think it's probably the most important part of Reach's story. By 2010, we'd been given a decade of feeling like a powerhouse. Sure, ODST made us feel significantly weaker, but we were still far above our Marine counterparts. Now, because of this game, our efforts and all those other games before were given even more significance, because at the end of the day, we're just a soldier. Just because we donned a shiny blinking tin can doesn't mean we're immune from death's embrace. But that's kind of the cool thing about Reach, isn't it? We don't know our name, or our face, or our past, but we know what became of it. Our actions led to countless ripples throughout the galaxy, and because of us, we were able to return. Nobody will know what we did, what it cost, or what it took to accomplish. But with this one mission, we're given a much wider perspective in the universe we've been sitting in for 10 whole years. We were mortal. We were just as likely to fall as everyone else before us on the battlefield, but because of our actions, we survived, showing that nothing's really gone forever. We just had something that no other Spartan had, something that our current Spartan doesn't have now.
Can you guess? Luck. Was I wrong? It didn't take long for Reach to fall. Our enemy was ruthless, efficient, but they weren't nearly fast enough. For you had already passed the torch, and because of you, we found Halo, unlocked its secrets, shattered our enemy's resolve. Our victory, your victory, was so close. I wish you could have lived to see it. But you belong to Reach. Your body, your armor, all burned and turned to glass. Everything. Except your courage. That you gave to us. And with it, we can rebuild.
Cortana, all I need to know is, did we lose them?
I think we both know the answer to that.
Oh my god, I can't believe this has actually ended up being done. Okay, so basically, while I was doing my research, I ended up finding a bunch of stuff that I couldn't end up fitting in this coherently, and I had no idea what I wanted this video to be by the end. During the commentary, Marty made mention of something called resource bonfires, and I didn't originally include it in the scripting because I didn't know what they were, but I did a bit more research and applied a bit more context and some of my background knowledge and some of the other stuff, and I think I might have figured out somewhat of what they're referring to. Keep in mind, I could totally be wrong. This is not definitive, this is not in concrete, but I'd like to take a crack at it, and if I'm wrong, so don't take this part with a grain of salt. During Bungie's reign, Halo was an ambitious series where the minds of the developers were they tried to do way more than they probably should have. And they ended up having to cut a lot of it because of that, due to the limitations of time. Halo ZE lost half of its levels, Halo 2 lost a third of its story, Halo 3 lost 3 of its missions, and we've been digging those up throughout the files in MCC. But Reach, we don't really have that much background knowledge of other stuff aside from what they've told us. But with that in mind, I'm willing to assume that that means Bungie had an original plan for the end of this mission. Because in the commentary they said like, oh, like the end of this mission was a resource bonfire. I'm assuming that because of the limitations that they had based on the time restraints and the other stuff that they were working on, like Destiny at the time, I think this vision was never really utilized to its full potential because of that reason, and that's what they're referring to here. I will bring further examples of this later on, but I can't say for certain what the original intent for this mission was. However, I hope the original intent of this mission can one day be realized through mods, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Thank you for my TED Talk. I've also put this weapon off for too long, and it's about time I talk about it since you've been seeing it this whole time. May I introduce to you the Concussion Rifle. This weapon is Reach's equivalent to Halo 2 and 3's Brute Shot, barraging enemies with explosive rounds that launch them further on impact. While only high-ranking enemies usually seem to carry this weapon, you can usually use this yourself as a means of performing agile maneuvers similar to grenade jumps. However, this isn't really all too helpful in this game, considering Reach already gave us the jetpack. But I still want to show it off in Reach's new arsenal, and I'm running low on missions to fit him in. I only have 3 or so weapons left, so I might as well get him out of the way. So yeah, another tangent. The DMR, equivalent to the BR from Halo 2 and 3. Semi-automatic precision weapon with a reticle bloom to prevent spam. The focus rifle, replacement for the beam rifle and sentinel beam. Basically the laser from Guilty Spark. Plasma repeater, multiplayer equivalent to UNSC's assault rifle. Less accurate version of plasma rifle. Not worth bringing back, but cool design, 4 out of 10. Okay, that's it. I can finally focus on just the story. There's nothing else to focus on. We're good. So in the time I did this, I've tried to find out a coherent timeline of everything that happened, but nothing ended up being coherent at all. All I ended up finding out is that like everything is in pieces. Nothing is like structurally sound. You have to go through so many outside sources to get an actual quote-unquote canonical thing of Reach. But if you want it beginning to end, and if you want your inconsistencies, here's what you need to know. First things first, the game uses Reach time, the books use UNSC time. Totally different things. They do not line up at all. Number 2, the reason they found Reach is because of 2 things. 1, there was a fucking zealot who happened to find the Holy Relic, but 2, there was a battle on the UNSC Iroquois with keys, and after the fight, they ended up attaching a tracker to it and used that to follow it back to Reach. And the 3rd thing, there was a thing called Operation Red Flag, where the Oni actually planned for this whole thing to happen. They were going to use a very important colony that the Covenant could not give up as a means of like just completely glassing the planet, because they needed to capture a ship, equip the new Spartan 2s, send them over to the Prophets, and then like use that as leverage to try to negotiate a peace treaty. But because of everything that went down, what they just ended up doing a blind jump, whatever the fuck. I don't know. I thought it was just like an immediate thing, but time worked differently in space. Did you know that freaking Sergeant Johnson is 84 years old in Halo 3? I didn't know that, but it makes sense because time doesn't work the same way as we think it does. When you're in space, everything works differently. If you're watching this, congratulations. I didn't expect you to stick out this far. But, anyway, yeah, the timeline is very, very, very convoluted, and it's weird. I don't like how I have all this useless Halo knowledge, but this is the life we have now. Anyway, as I continue this, there are a bunch of people I actually do want to thank very much for helping me on this project. Number 1 is Combustion Man, also my friends Tristan and Ray. You two are real ones. I used so much of the footage we made. If you saw that little saber shots a few times, the map was actually made by me and Tristan. We were just fucking around, and that was really fun to do. But overall, I think this game is a phenomenal piece. I think it does have its issues, but all in all, I think it's just great that it's finally getting some new love all these years later. Another thing I'd like to say is, in the time that I was making this, I didn't actually get to meet my deadlines. The first one was going to be Halo Infinite, the second one was going to be the multiplayer level shutting down, and unfortunately I didn't get to meet either of those deadlines, but I did get to play with everyone the last day. It was really fun. Everyone, thank you for giving me that one last day of nostalgia. It was a really great feeling, and I'm glad I got to play it with you all. All in all, I think this was a phenomenal project to take on. The final tidbit I will leave you with was this credit sequence was exactly 7 minutes long, to the frame, and that is fascinating to me. They are obsessed with it. Anyway, thanks for watching this video, and hope you guys have yourself a lovely day.